C.S. Lewis once pointed out that we worry that our desires are too strong. He said the problem is that our desires are not strong enough. So today I want to grant you permission, my friends, to think big. What do they say? Go big or go home, right? And so it is with the story of David and Goliath. Have you heard this one before? Yeah, right? 1 Samuel chapter 17 records the epic battle between the shepherd boy and the Philistine warrior. Spoiler alert. Verse 50, David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. The reason being that David dared go where no one else would go. Models for us this courageous faith that thinks bigger and better and beyond convention. And the problem is, once we've been around for a little while, we kind of settle in, don't we? And we temper our expectations to the community in which we find ourselves. Well, we don't do that here. We don't pray that way. We don't think like that. We just kind of conform to what everyone else is doing. And the fact is, it cripples us. And we don't even recognize it until one day we wake up and realize what our lives have become. So I want you to think with me this morning about that area of your life that you've given up on as impossible. That place where you no longer dare to go. I want you to think about your own Goliath. What is the giant in your life that looms over you, threatens and intimidates you, and keeps you from becoming the best you that you can be? You see, we know how the story ends. David kills the giant. But what I want to look at this morning is the battles that precede the battle. Okay? Chapter 17 sets the stage. The Philistines, verse 1, gathered their armies for battle. Verse 3, the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with the valley between them. So here we have this classic battle formation. Good guys on one side, bad guys on the other. In verse 4, there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, and this was one big, mean son of a gun. I made the mistake over in Menlo Park a while back of sharing with the preschool kids. We had a little chapel time every week, and I talked about how big and mean the giant was. This poor little girl on the front row just burst into tears. She was so scared, so frightened. And we gathered around her. We said, it's okay. He wasn't really that mean. He was a mean dude. He was a big guy, imposing and intimidating, and he laid down the gauntlet for the Israelites. Let's see, verse 8. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Verse 16, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And what it doesn't say, but what we would take away from that, is that for 40 days Israel cowered. There was not a one of them who had the guts to take on this big, mean dude. And that's our convention. That's our settling in. That's our coming to the conclusion that some things in our life are just too big to change. Some problems we face are insurmountable. What we need to do is channel our inner David. He becomes for us the face of courage. Verse 12, now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse. Verse 13, the three eldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. Verse 15, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So 3 of Jesse's sons were there for 40 days listening to the Philistine boast. David was not. David was the classic afterthought. He was the last child. He was the oops baby. David was home with the sheep and went back and forth, and his father had him carry supplies to the battle line. That's how it happened to be that David showed up one day. His father sent him on an errand. And David showed up, and he heard what was going on, and he heard what was being said. All the Israelites, verse 24, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. The Israelites said, have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he's come up to defy Israel. The king will greatly enrich the man who kills him and will give him his daughter and make his family free in Israel. So David began to inquire, piqued his interest, got his curiosity up. And what occurred to David is, how come nobody's taking care of this dog? Why are we all standing around shaking in our shoes? So David began to ask and to question and to inquire. And here we have the battles now that precede the battle. The first in verse 28. His eldest brother Eliab heard him talking to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart. You've come down just to see the battle. David said, what have I done now? It was only a question. He turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him as before. Eliab's protest represents the voice of scorn. David was insignificant and should have known better than to engage the giant. Yet David apparently had come to own his own insignificance and would not be deterred by the scorn of his brother. Isn't it interesting how the people closest to us are most likely to kind of put us in our place? You little runt. Who do you think you are? You're not. And what's going on here? Eliab's wrestling with his own shame, with his own sense of failure, with the fact that he's not man enough, pardon the sexist expression, to go out and engage the giant. He's feeling his own inadequacy, and he's casting that on to David. The moral of the story is you can't listen to that voice because there's another voice within you, your own voice, that's longing to be heard. It's the voice that says you can before the voices around you say that you can't. Don't let others talk you out of what you're capable of doing. And it might even sound like your own voice. Eliab, your mean older brother, might not even be around, but you're listening to and you're acting on this distant echo that's reverberating in your head. You're letting a voice from the past, maybe even someone who's long deceased and no longer part of your life, you're letting that guide and govern today's decisions. And the spirit of David is a spirit of courage that's prompting you to act in a way that's consistent with today's values, with a way that's consistent of what you're capable of doing that you never even recognized before. What we're looking to do is tap into something. Go somewhere where we've not been before. Give ourselves permission to dream and do big. That's what David shows us. He's not going to be stifled by the voice of intimidation, not Eliab's or his father's or anyone else's. God gives us permission to listen to the still promptings of our own voice, our own heart, our own courage. And it may seem unfamiliar and different because we're not accustomed to doing it. David shows us how. Verse 31, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul. Now Saul's the king. And he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you're just a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father," like a couple days ago. "And whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." And Saul might have said, "Lord, have mercy. The life of the nation is in the hands of this boy." How ironic that even David's questioning and interaction didn't give any grown warrior man in the crowd the courage to go out against the Philistine. They're all just holding back. Not my circus. Not my monkeys. Saul's protest, telling David he's only a boy, represents the voice of reason. Eliab showed us the voice of intimidation. Saul shows us the voice of reason because we've come to tell ourselves and to believe that some battles are just not realistically won. I'm just a child in an adult world. Again, instead of allowing this to deter him, David appeals to prior experience and he wins over King Saul. The lessons we learn along the way are of great value in facing the giants before us. This is a principle: success breeds success. So maybe you take on one area of your life and you realize that, man, I can do this. And then the next thing you take on gives you even greater confidence. So sometimes it's just about taking one small step and then another, and success builds upon success. That's how it was for David. Nobody knew about his wrestling with bears and lions, but he knew. This was a training ground for bringing down Philistine giants. So I wonder what you've told yourself through the voice of Saul about what's possible in your life. And I wonder about whether or not our common sense is nothing more than a disguised lack of faith. That we've concluded, for whatever reason, that we're not good enough. We're not big enough. We're not smart enough. We're not thin enough. We're not good looking enough. Whatever it is in our life that has tempered our expectations of what's possible needs to be challenged, okay? I want you to envision yourself inside of a refrigerator box, and it's time to start kicking and punching to get out of that sucker that's constraining you. Overcome in your life the voice of common sense that says you can't do it, you're not big enough, you're not strong enough. David would not be deterred. Saul gave him his armor, he tried it on, he wasn't used to it, he took the armor off, picked up a few rocks. What did he do? He went out there, flung one, and that sucker fell. Scorn, reason, Goliath himself, in his last words, represents the voice of intimidation. Verse 41. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." Goliath's boastful protest represents the voice of intimidation. The enemies that you and I face shout boastfully against us in an attempt to get us to back down. Once more, David is undeterred and shows that he can trash talk with the best. And he reveals the source of his confidence and the thing that Eliab, his brother, and Saul the king had long forgotten, that the battle belongs to the Lord. David owns his nothingness, his weakness, his vulnerability, and he says, "Look, folks, it's not about me. It's not about the shepherd boy. It's about the king inside the shepherd boy that knows whose he is. It's about the God that we represent." What you guys have lost sight of is the fact that when God's in the equation, things change drastically, dramatically. So the value of this narrative is seen for us on two levels. David serves as an example of courageous faith and king-like confidence. And I hope that you've been encouraged this morning to think like David about the giants that you face every day. The lessons that he learned serve as an encouragement to us as we face the challenges in our lives. But beyond this, perhaps more importantly, David prefigures another shepherd king who overcame the odds and defeated the giants of sin and death and hell. As we stand in his victory, the battles before us are already won. So we can say with David that the battle belongs to the Lord, and we can rest with David in the finished work of Christ, and we can say with the Apostle Paul that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I want you to take the resurrection power that we sang about this morning and bring it to bear in the challenges that you find yourself facing. I invited you as we began this morning to think about that area of your life that you've given up on, that you've become hopeless about, the thing that you've written off as impossible. I've tried before and failed. I want to invite you to re-examine the voices that are reverberating around in your head. The voice of scorn. You can't do it. You're just a kid. The voice of reason. Give it up. Some battles are just too impossible. The voice of intimidation. You can't do this. I want you to challenge those voices, put them in their place by exercising a courageous faith like David in Christ-like confidence. Allow me to pray with you. We've heard that the battle belongs to the Lord, and how true it is that we are powerless on our own, and in our own strength have failed, maybe miserably, maybe shamefully, maybe repeatedly. But God grant us the spirit of David, to believe the unbelievable, to attempt the impossible, and to move and stretch in ways that are new and unfamiliar and perhaps frightening and unnerving, but are consistent with our truest selves. God, give us a courage like that. And we will be careful to give you all of the praise, glory, and honor that is due you. In the name of Christ, our conquering King. Amen.
God's not